There is a hill covered in trash at the very beginning of the world. Not Oo's world, our world, the one we recognize. The hill sits in darkness as the opening notes of a familiar guitar tune begin to drift in, and if you have ever paused, really paused on that very first establishing shot of Adventure Time before the title card even appears, you have seen something the show never once tries to draw your attention to. Scattered across that dark hillside, half buried in dirt and overgrown with strange vegetation, are nuclear warheads, unexploded, rusted, several of them, just sitting there among the rubble of a civilization that ended before anyone currently living in Oo was born. The camera glides past them with the casual indifference of a world that has simply accepted this as part of the landscape. That is what Adventure Time is, beneath all the candy colors and the stretchy dog and the shouted catchphrases. It is a show about what comes after the worst thing that ever happened to the world. Everything you love about it, every dungeon crawled, every monster punched, every piece of bubblegum architecture, every mournful song played on a red axe bass exists on the grave of everything that came before. And the show embeds that truth so deeply into its visual language, its background details, its throwaway moments, that you can watch it for years before the full weight of it finally settles somewhere in your chest and doesn't leave. So let's slow down tonight. Let's be quiet with this show the way it actually deserves. Let's look at the parts people usually miss, turn over the theories that hold up under scrutiny, and sit with the implications of a cartoon that was telling you something real and heavy and genuinely moving for 10 seasons while you were busy watching a dog stretch himself into a boat. Get somewhere comfortable. Let the world outside go quiet. Before we go further, drop a comment and let me know where you are in the world right now and what time it is where you're watching. There's something I love about knowing that people are falling asleep to this from completely different corners of the planet, different hours of the night, maybe different seasons entirely. And if you haven't already, a subscription genuinely helps this kind of slow, careful content reach people who need it. Part 1. The World Beneath the World. Adventure Time is set approximately 1,000 years after the end of human civilization as we know it. This is not ambiguous. The show confirms it repeatedly through background details, character history, direct exposition, and the occasional blink-and-you-miss-it visual, so precise it feels almost accusatory. The land of Oo is Earth. Specifically, it appears to be what was once North America, though the continent has been so dramatically altered by the event known as the Great Mushroom War that much of its geography is unrecognizable. A massive chunk of the planet's surface has been obliterated. If you look at the globe shown from orbit in certain episodes, you can see the wound where the American continent used to extend, a crater large enough to be visible from space. The term Mushroom War is almost certainly a reference to the shape of a nuclear detonation, that iconic billowing cloud that rises from a nuclear explosion. The Mushroom Cloud. The whole war is named after that shape, which tells you something about the scale of what happened. This wasn't a conventional conflict. The nuclear exchange was total, civilization ending. The kind of event that doesn't just kill people but erases the conditions under which people can exist. Infrastructure, agriculture, knowledge systems, social structures. All of it gone or so severely damaged that recovery took centuries and resulted in something almost unrecognizable from what came before. The opening credits encode this truth before you even get to the first scene of any episode. Watch that initial sequence carefully. The first real image beyond the dark hill is a pan across a landscape that contains the rusted hulks of automobiles buried in sediment, the skeletal frameworks of buildings that have collapsed into ruin and been colonized by new plant life, fragments of machinery whose purpose is now impossible to determine, and those nuclear warheads already mentioned, sitting among everything else with a casualness that is somehow more disturbing than if they were presented dramatically. There is also, and this one took people years to notice, a severed arm protruding from a tree, grayish and mottled, the hand bent into a gesture that looks almost like a wave. The limb has clearly been there long enough that the tree has grown around it partially. Whatever person that arm once belonged to has been incorporated into the new landscape. The show does this constantly. In practically every episode, if you give the backgrounds real attention, you will find ruins, half-buried shopping carts, collapsed highway overpasses draped in vines, the remnants of fast food signs, their original text worn away but their shape still vaguely legible to anyone who knows what they're looking at. These aren't set dressing chosen at random. The background artists made deliberate choices, episode after episode, season after season, to populate this magical, colorful world with the physical memory of the one that came before. The ruins are everywhere because the ruins actually are everywhere. The land of U was built on top of what existed before, and the old world keeps surfacing. One of the most stunning examples of this comes from Season 8, Episode 17, titled High Strangeness. In that episode, you can catch a graph showing Earth's total population over time, a genuine-looking data visualization that someone clearly put genuine thought into creating. The graph shows population rising through human history in that familiar exponential curve, continuing upward through what we might recognize as our own present era, and then dropping, catastrophically, vertically. The kind of decline that on a graph looks less like a decrease and more like a cliff. The population line almost reaches zero, and then, very slowly, over hundreds of years, it begins to creep back upward. If you look closely at the same graph, you can also spot a smaller dip occurring roughly in the 1300s, a detail that corresponds precisely with the Black Death, the bubonic plague that killed somewhere between 30 and 60% of Europe's population. That detail isn't narratively relevant to the episode it appears in. Nobody calls attention to it. It is simply there, accurate, embedded in the show's understanding of its own fictional history, with enough care that the creators felt it necessary to include a medieval plague in a background prop that most viewers would never notice. That level of commitment is what separates Adventure Time from most animated shows. The world has internal consistency that extends into details that require active excavation to find. And it is worth understanding why this matters beyond pure fan service or the satisfaction of finding hidden things. The hidden details are not there to reward trivia knowledge. They are there because the show is committed to the idea that the world it depicts is real in the sense that matters. It has a past, that past leaves traces, and those traces are visible to anyone willing to look. The show treats its own fictional history with enough respect to embed it in every frame, which is the visual equivalent of saying, this is not a backdrop we invented for convenience. This is a place that has been through things. This is a world that has a weight to it, earned through everything that happened before you arrived. The background ruins are the show's promise to you. We are not making this up as we go. We know what happened here. We know why it looks like this. We know what was lost and what it cost and what grew in the aftermath. And if you slow down long enough to look at the edges of the frame, we will show you. In Simon and Marcy, one of the show's most emotionally devastating episodes, we see the aftermath of the Mushroom War through the perspective of young Marcelin and the man who would eventually become the Ice King, back when he was still recognizably Simon Petrikov. The world they move through in that episode is not the colorful magical landscape of U. It is gray, quiet, emptied of people. Buildings stand but have no occupants. Streets that once carried millions of human beings are silent. Simon and Marceline move through a city, possibly what was once Montreal, based on certain visual cues that has been stripped of all the noise and urgency that defines urban human life. The only living things seem to be the two of them, and whatever threats lurk in the dark. The contrast between that gray emptiness and the bright, chaotic, overcrowded U of the main series is one of the show's most profound visual statements. It took 1,000 years of slow magic and mutation and new life and new civilizations being built on old bones to get from Simon and Marcy walking alone through a dead city to Finn and Jake sprinting through a world so full of life that it overflows. That transformation, that 1,000-year arc from devastation to abundance, is the show's emotional backbone. Everything that seems happy and colorful on the surface of U is the result of a very long time of recovery. And the wounds are still visible if you know where to look. There is also the matter of what the Mushroom War actually produced, beyond the immediate devastation. The mutagenic element in the weapons used, specifically the mushroom bomb, which appears to have been a distinct weapon from conventional nuclear devices, combining nuclear force with some kind of biological or magical mutagenic agent, fundamentally altered the nature of life on Earth. Animals gained sentience and eventually language. Food developed consciousness. The very concept of magic, which the show treats as genuinely supernatural, appears to have been introduced into the world by the same catastrophic event. Princess Bubblegum, in one of her more clinical moments, describes magic as existing in tension with science throughout U's history, and there are suggestions that magic itself was either created or massively amplified by the Mushroom War's aftermath. The world that emerged isn't just a damaged version of the one that came before, it's a genuinely new thing. And that transformation from nuclear wasteland to the magical absurdist postcard of Ooh happened so completely that most of the beings who live there now have no direct memory of what came before. The ruins are background furniture. The nuclear warheads are just interesting shapes in the hillside. The arm in the tree is simply part of the landscape. But underneath all of it, the old world is still there, waiting for someone to stop and look. Part 2. The snail that watches everything. Here is something that sounds like a small charming detail until you think about it for more than 30 seconds. In every single episode of Adventure Time, every single one, there is a snail hidden somewhere in the frame. A small, brown, ordinary-looking snail. Sometimes it's in the foreground, sitting on a rock or a leaf, plainly visible if you're looking for it. Sometimes it's a tiny shape in the far background, barely distinguishable from other environmental details, requiring the kind of frame-by-frame scrutiny that only exists in the age of streaming. Occasionally, it occupies a genuinely surprising location inside a treasure chest, perched on top of a character's hat, reflected in a pool of water at the edge of the frame. And the snail waves. Not always, but often enough to establish a pattern, often enough to feel like something intentional rather than incidental. The snail will raise one of its small eye stalks or gesture with one of its tiny protuberances in a way that clearly reads as a greeting. It is aware of the camera. It is, in some sense, that the show never fully commits to explaining, aware of you. For most of the series, this reads as a delightful recurring bit, the kind of thing creators leave in their work for dedicated viewers to discover and share. A reward for close watching. A way of saying, we see you seeing us. And it is that, but it is also, eventually, something considerably darker. In Season 4's Return to the Nightosphere, the snail appears as it always does, and for the first time you can detect something slightly different about its expression if you're watching carefully. Its eyes seem heavier. The wave feels less cheerful. And in subsequent episodes, if you track the snail's appearances in sequence, there is a gradual quality to what you're seeing, not dramatic enough to register consciously on first viewing, but undeniable in retrospect of something wrong. By the Season 4 finale, The Lich, it becomes explicit. The snail, the specific snail that has been waving at viewers across hundreds of episodes, has been possessed by the mind of the Lich. The show's primary villain, an ancient cosmic entity dedicated to the extinction of all life, has been hiding inside this tiny creature, moving through the world in a form so small and so innocuous that no one thought to look twice at it. The snail's wave, viewed through this lens, transforms from a charming greeting into something more unsettling. The Lich has been watching, all along. From inside every single episode, that green ancient evil has been present, patient, waiting. And yet the show never actually explains this completely. The Lich's consciousness ends up in the snail at some point before the main series begins, or perhaps during it, and the exact timeline of the possession is left deliberately vague. What we know for certain is that by the time the Season 4 finale occurs, the Lich is operating through the snail, and the snail's appearances throughout the series up to that point are retroactively charged with implication. There is something genuinely eerie about this, and it operates on a level that's hard to fully articulate. The snail is small, the snail is harmless, the snail waves, and behind its wave, behind its tiny ordinary shell, is something older than human civilization, something that predates the dinosaurs, something that views all life as a mistake to be corrected. The contrast between the creature's physical insignificance and the magnitude of what it contains is a microcosm of something Adventure Time does over and over again. It hides catastrophic things in ordinary packages. After the Lich's escape from the snail, which happens through a ritual that the Lich manipulates Finn into performing, another instance of extraordinary evil operating through subtle, patient manipulation, the snail continues to appear in subsequent episodes. The snail keeps waving. Without the Lich inside it now, the snail is just a snail again. But you can't quite see it the same way. The awareness that any small, innocuous thing in this world might contain something terrible has been introduced, and it doesn't leave. This is one of the reasons the show's Easter egg culture feels different from most animated series. When you find an Easter egg in Adventure Time, you are not just finding a fun hidden detail. You are frequently finding evidence that the world of this show is stranger and more layered than it initially appears. The snail is the perfect example. Start as a charming, recurring visual gag, end as a piece of cosmic horror. That transformation from cute to disturbing, from surface to depth, is the show's essential move. Dedicated fans tracked the snail across every episode once its significance became clear, creating elaborate visual guides to each appearance. What they found, beyond confirming the snail's omnipresence, was that its behavior does subtly change over the course of the Lich possession arc. It waves less frequently. It appears in slightly more shadowed locations. If you arrange the appearances chronologically and watch them in sequence, you can almost read a story in the snail's body language, the story of an ancient evil entity trying to look like nothing unusual, trying to be overlooked, hiding in plain sight by being something so small and harmless that the concept of threat doesn't attach to it. The snail's eventual continuation after the possession still appearing, still occasionally waving, now just an ordinary animal in an extraordinary world, is its own kind of statement. The Lich left. The snail remained. Life continues in the aftermath of evil's occupation. That's an Adventure Time truth, delivered through a recurring visual gag so small that most people never think about it until someone explains it, and then they can never stop thinking about it. Part 3. The Ice That Remembers. Of all the character histories in Adventure Time, Simon Petrikov's is the one that hits hardest on repeated viewing. Not because it's the most dramatic, though it is extremely dramatic, but because the show builds it across so many episodes, so carefully and slowly, that by the time you have the full picture, every early Ice King moment you thought was comic relief has been retrospectively transformed into something that makes your chest hurt. Start at the beginning of who he was. Simon Petrikov, before the Great Mushroom War, was an antiquarian, someone who studied and collected ancient artifacts for a living. He was academic, gentle by temperament, clearly intelligent in the way of someone who has spent years developing deep, specialized knowledge. He wore round glasses, he had dark hair, he was, by every account we have, a fundamentally decent person. He had a fiancée named Betty, whom he loved genuinely and called his princess, a term of endearment that would later become bleakly significant. They were happy together in the way that people are happy when they haven't yet encountered the thing that's going to unmake them. Simon found the crown at a dock in northern Scandinavia. He bought it from a worker there, apparently attracted to it as an artifact of unknown age and origin. There's something worth pausing on in that transaction. The crown chose its moment carefully. An antiquarian. Someone who would be specifically inclined to acquire an ancient mysterious object. Someone whose professional identity was built around finding value in old things. Whether the crown has anything like conscious intent is debatable, but the circumstances of its acquisition feel weighted, the way significant moments in the show often do. He put it on to make Betty laugh. That detail is in the tape he leaves for her, the video diary that becomes one of the show's most heartbreaking documents. He put it on to make Betty laugh. A joke between two people in love. The kind of casual, intimate silliness that exists only when you feel completely safe with someone. And then something happened. He doesn't know what. He experienced a blackout, came back to himself, and Betty was looking at him with an expression he had never seen before. Whatever he did while wearing the crown for those few moments, it was bad enough that she left him. The show never tells us what that was, and that silence is its own kind of cruelty. We don't know what the crown made him do. We only know that Betty, who loved him, looked at what he had done and couldn't stay. He kept wearing it. This is the part that seems strange until you understand the context. By the time Betty left, the Mushroom War was already beginning. The world outside was fracturing. Simon was alone in a collapsing civilization, and the crown gave him power, ice magic, protection from the cold, a kind of aggressive capability that the pre-war world had no use for, but the post-war one desperately required. He wore it to survive, and every time he wore it, it took something else from him. His memories blurred, his personality shifted, he became capable of things that Simon Petrikov would never have done, and then forgot having done them, and then stopped being fully Simon Petrikov long enough that it mattered. He met Marceline in the ruins. She was a small child, crouched in the wreckage of what had been a city, clutching a stuffed animal, alone. The world had taken her mother. Elise had been trying to get Marceline to a fallout shelter and had succumbed to illness on the way, leaving her daughter believing for centuries that she had been abandoned. Simon found her crying and stayed. He became her protector, her keeper, something between a father figure and an older brother, navigating the devastated landscape with a child on his back and a crown on his head that was quietly, incrementally dissolving his identity. The episode Simon and Marcy captures this period with an intimacy that feels almost unfair. Simon is warm with her, patient. He sings to her. He finds her soup, specifically a can of soup from a ruined supermarket, the brand name Campbell's just barely visible, another quiet connection between the world of Ooh and our world. He uses the crown when he has to protect them from the mutated creatures that stalk the empty streets, and you can see the effort it costs him not physically but cognitively, the way his speech becomes slightly less organized after each use, the way his eyes hold something a little different afterward. He gives her a stuffed doll named Hambo. The significance of this single object radiates throughout Marceline's storyline for the entire series. Hambo is the connective tissue between who Marceline was, a small, frightened child in a destroyed world, and who she becomes. She carries it for centuries. When it's taken from her by a boyfriend named Ash, the violation is enormous precisely because of what the doll represents. When Finn eventually retrieves it for her by traveling back in time, the emotional payoff is among the show's most quietly affecting moments. Simon left her eventually. He had to. The crown was progressing. He was less himself with each passing month. And he knew, in those intervals of clarity that became shorter and rarer, that the version of himself that was emerging might hurt her. He wrote her a letter explaining this, aware of the bitter irony that by the time he truly became Ice King, he would have no memory of having written it. The letter is addressed to Marceline. It explains that he might not know her anymore soon. It asks her to forgive him. The Ice King of the early series is a buffoon, sad, sometimes, in a way that reads as played for laughs his loneliness, his obsession with kidnapping princesses, his strange relationship with his penguin companions. He is a figure you are allowed to find ridiculous. And then you learn what he was, and the ridiculousness becomes a portrait of devastation so thorough that nothing recognizable remains. His obsession with princesses, his compulsion to collect them, to keep them near him. He calls them princess. He's looking for Betty. Not consciously, not with any awareness. The crown erased his memory of Betty the same way it erased everything else. But something in whatever remains of Simon still reaches, still searches, still uses the word she was called when they were happy together. He doesn't know why. The crown left him with the shape of his longing, and removed the person the longing was for. The episode I Remember You, where Marceline and the Ice King have a conversation in which he has no memory of who they were to each other, is perhaps the single most affecting piece of storytelling in the show's entire run. He brings her his old papers, covered in music and in notes about his deterioration, and she begins to piece them together into a song while he improvises alongside her, not understanding what he's doing, not knowing why the words resonate. They are making music together from the ruins of what they were, and Marceline is crying, and the Ice King doesn't know why. What the crown actually is, its deeper nature and origin, gets explored in the episode Evergreen, which reaches back to the Cretaceous period, 65 million years ago. There was an ice elemental in that era, a powerful sorcerer named Urgence Evergreen, who was attempting to create a magical crown that could prevent a catastrophic comet from striking the Earth. The crown was designed to grant the deepest wish of whoever wore it. Evergreen intended to wear it himself and wish the comet away. His apprentice, a small creature named Gunther, worshipped Evergreen. Not in a healthy way, in the way of someone who has made another person their entire understanding of what it means to be significant. Gunther wanted, more than anything, to be like his master, to be a great ice wizard, to be powerful and commanding and respected the way Evergreen was. When Evergreen was incapacitated and Gunther put the crown on instead, the crown granted Gunther's deepest wish, the wish of a creature who wanted to become an ice wizard, a powerful, blue-skinned, white-bearded ice wizard. The crown was now permanently tuned to that desire, and every person who wore it afterward would be gradually remade in that image. The crown's magic was shaped by Gunther's longing, and it imposed that shape on every subsequent wearer regardless of who they were or what they wanted. Simon Petrikov didn't lose himself to something random. He was consumed by the echo of a wish made by a small creature who admired his master so much that the admiration became the shape of cosmic magic. And the comet struck anyway, the one the crown was meant to stop. The comet that, as it happens, carried the essence of the Lich. But that connection comes later. For now, let's stay with Simon, because there's one more piece of his story that matters enormously for understanding the show's themes. When the series finale restores him, when Betty's sacrifice inside Gold breaks the crown's curse, and he returns to himself, he wakes up in a world he doesn't recognize. 1,000 years have passed. Betty is gone. Marceline is there, and she still loves him. But the relationship they're rebuilding is between two people who are different from who they were when their relationship began. Simon is old. He is lost. He is a man displaced across a millennium by a crown that took everything from him and left him alive to inventory the losses. His arc in Fiona and Cake, where he struggles to find meaning after the crown is gone, eventually teaching history at Wizard City, gradually reconnecting with life, is among the show's most honest portrayals of what it looks like to survive catastrophic loss. Not with triumph, with confusion, and slowly, with something that resembles peace. Part 4. Marceline, Child of the Apocalypse. There's a version of Marceline's story that you could summarize in 2 sentences. Half-demon girl grows up in the aftermath of nuclear war, eventually becomes a vampire queen, spends 1,000 years being cooler than everyone she meets. That version is true. It's also wildly insufficient. The details of Marceline's origin are scattered across the series in fragments, rarely given to you all at once, always requiring assembly from different episodes and different points in the timeline. Her mother, Elise, was human. Her father, Hunson Abadir, is the Lord of Evil, the ruler of a dimension called the Nightosphere that functions as the show's version of Hell, a chaotic, soul-consuming place where the normal rules of physics and morality seem to have reached a mutual agreement to stop applying. Hunson is ancient, powerful, and chaotic evil in a way that the show simultaneously takes seriously and treats with a kind of exasperated familiarity. He is terrible. He is also undeniably her dad. Marceline was a child when the Mushroom War happened. She was living with her mother, Elise, somewhere in what appears to be a temperate part of North America. The episode Everything Stays shows the two of them in a trailer in what looks like a desert region, and other flashbacks suggest they moved often. Elise knew the bombs were coming. She tried to get Marceline to safety, specifically to a fallout shelter referred to in the show as a clubhouse in the episode Obsidian. She didn't make it. Elise succumbed to illness on the way. The specifics are left somewhat vague, but given the context of nuclear fallout and the immediate post-war period, the implications are grim enough. She died before reaching the shelter, leaving Marceline to arrive at its door alone, to find it open and the people inside dead. Marceline believed for a very long time, centuries, possibly that her mother had abandoned her. The episode Obsidian reveals that Elise left a recording for her daughter, an apology and explanation, hidden in the shelter. Marceline didn't find it until she returned to the shelter as an adult. All those years, all that distance from her mother's memory, all the ways that relationship had been complicated by Marceline's sense of abandonment built on a misunderstanding. Her mother didn't leave. Her mother died trying to get her to safety. That revelation lands in Obsidian with a quietness that the show earns through years of careful setup. You understand, watch it quiet, that this is the kind of thing that doesn't fix the hurt so much as change its shape. The wound is still there. It just means something different now. Then there's Hunson. The Lord of Evil ate her French fries. This sounds like a joke, and in a sense it is one. The show uses it that way initially, but it functions as the crystallized form of a much more serious complaint. Marceline's grievance with her father is that he was never present, and the one time he was present, he demonstrated his priorities in the most vivid possible way. She had food. Food matters enormously in the post-war period, particularly for a child navigating a world that has just ended. And Hunson, the ruler of an entire demonic dimension who has no physical need to eat anything, consumed her fries. The specific callousness of it, the casual disregard for what was hers, the failure to understand what it meant to her became the song Fry Song, became the anchor for a 1,000-year complicated relationship with a father who loves her and also has no idea how to demonstrate love in ways she can actually receive. By the time the main series occurs, Marceline is approximately 1,000 years old and a vampire. She was not born one. The miniseries Stakes reveals how she came to be what she is. After Simon left her after she spent time surviving on her own in the post-war wilderness, eventually carving out territory and a kind of wild independence for herself, the land of Owu developed its original vampire population. The Vampire King and his court were a genuine threat to the emerging world, and Marceline, with her half-demon abilities, could fight them. She became a vampire hunter. She was good at it. She defeated the Vampire King's court, absorbing their souls and their specific vampiric abilities in the process, and then the Vampire King bit her, giving her his nature, making her the last vampire by transforming the one person capable of hunting the rest of them. This is another of the show's characteristic moves. The outcome that looks like victory turns out to have been more complicated than expected. Marceline defeated the vampires. She also became one. Both things are true simultaneously. What she gains from the absorption of the vampire court souls is genuinely interesting in terms of the show's power system. Different vampires she hunted had different abilities, a creature called the Fool who could teleport, one called the Empress with hypnotic powers, the Hierophant who could shapeshift. Marceline absorbs these abilities along with the vampires themselves. By the time Stakes begins, she's carrying centuries-old power she barely thinks about anymore. And the miniseries forces a reckoning with those absorbed souls. When they're extracted from her, they manifest, briefly, as new vampires who need to be redefeated. What Marceline is, at her core, is someone who has been alone for an extraordinarily long time and developed elaborate defenses around that aloneness. The trickster persona, the punk exterior, the mischief used as deflection when actual emotion threatens to surface. The way she expresses genuine feeling almost exclusively through music, using her act space as the mediating layer between what she actually experiences and what she's willing to show. Her arc with Princess Bubblegum, which the finale confirms as a romantic relationship with its brief on-screen kiss, is the story of two people whose defenses are so well constructed that they spent years being unable to clearly say what they needed from each other. The song "I'm Just Your Problem" from What Was Missing is Marceline performing at Princess Bubblegum anger and distance while actually expressing longing and hurt. The entire What Was Missing episode is a precision instrument for revealing how these two characters feel without either of them saying it clearly. It takes until the series finale for the clarity to arrive. By that point, you have watched them orbit each other for a decade and you understand viscerally why a 1,000-year-old vampire who lost her mother and her surrogate father and had her home repeatedly disrupted would struggle to say, "I love you" without armor on. There are hidden details embedded in Marceline's history throughout the show that reward close attention. The note from Simon that Marceline keeps the one that becomes the song she and Ice King sing together in I Remember You was written on the back of scrapbooking paper. She kept it for over 1,000 years. She kept it even after the relationship it documented had been effectively erased from one of the two people who shared it. She carries it the way she carries Hambo, the way she carries everything from that period of her life. Carefully, permanently, unable to put it down. In Obsidian, a significant visual Easter egg connects to the very earliest episodes of the main series. The cave where Marceline and Princess Bubblegum eventually face the Glass Boy, and his dragon contains markings and artwork that date back to Marceline's earlier visits. The episode reveals that the two of them used to hide there, together when they were younger, when their relationship was still forming. Bubblegum has left a mark on the wall that reads, in small letters, "Marceline made me write this." Proof of a shared history the main series only hints at. Evidence of who they were to each other before the complications of leadership and difference, and the 1,000 small ways people failed to communicate, drove a wedge between them. Marceline's story is the show's most complete meditation on what it means to survive things. Not to overcome them, not to resolve them cleanly, but to carry them forward into subsequent decades and centuries, to learn what you can carry and what you need to set down, and to eventually slowly, imperfectly allow yourself to be known by someone anyway. Part 4b. The Songs That Hold the Memory. Before we leave Marceline's story, there is something worth spending more time with, the specific role that music plays in her character's architecture, and what the show is doing when it uses her songs as a storytelling device. Marceline has been writing songs for approximately 1,000 years. This is not a casual detail. 1,000 years is longer than most musical traditions in human history have existed. It is longer than the entirety of the period from which we have written musical notation. Marceline has been playing and composing and performing for longer than the span of recorded Western music history, and what you hear in her songs, the casual sophistication, the emotional directness, the ease with which she moves between registers carries the weight of that duration, even if you don't consciously register it. Her axe space is a family heirloom in a sense. It was her mother's axe, a battle axe that Marceline converted to a bass at some point in her long history, which is itself an act of transformation that speaks to something about who she is. Her mother's weapon became her instrument. The thing designed for violence became the thing she makes music with. This is extremely Marceline, and the show trusts you to understand it without explaining it. The song "I'm Just Your Problem" from the episode What Was Missing is the example most often cited when people talk about the show's use of music as emotional communication. The song is superficially about frustration and dismissal. Marceline singing at Princess Bubblegum about being ignored, about not being taken seriously, about being someone's problem rather than their person. It sounds, on the surface, like an expression of irritation. Watched closely, it is an expression of profound hurt masquerading as irritation, because Marceline has spent 1,000 years learning to do exactly that. The entire What Was Missing episode is built around a door that will only open for something genuinely precious that has been truly lost. The items each character offers: Jake's viola, Finn's t-shirt from Princess Bubblegum, BMO's controller don't work. What opens the door is Marceline's song, which is revealed, in context, to be about Princess Bubblegum specifically. The most genuinely precious lost thing in Marceline's life, at this point in the series, is her relationship with Bubblegum, something that has become complicated and distant and painful. The song that opens the door is the song about that. The door to the lost treasure opens when Marceline stops performing and starts actually feeling what she feels. The episode was made before the show had received permission from Cartoon Network to make the Marceline and Bubblegum relationship explicit, so everything is encoded and implicational. But the encoding is so careful and so clear that the episode functions differently in retrospect, after the finale confirms what the song was always about. The song "I'm Just Your Problem" is a love song written by someone who has not yet allowed herself to say that she's written a love song. "Remember You," the song that appears in "I Remember You," works in the opposite direction. Simon's notes, scrawled on scraps of paper when he still had moments of clarity during the Crown's early possession of him, become a song that Marceline assembles while he accompanies her, improvising, not knowing what he is accompanying or why the word's resonance with something he can no longer access. She is doing something extraordinarily difficult in that moment. She is making music with someone who cannot remember making music with her before, who cannot remember what they were to each other, who is present and absent simultaneously. She is having a conversation with a ghost using the real person's voice. The song is beautiful, and it is grief, and it is an act of love so sustained and specific that it becomes one of the show's most essential statements about what love looks like under conditions of real loss. She didn't give up on who Simon was. She kept the notes he wrote to her when he was still Simon enough to write them. She turned those notes into a song so that the Simon who remains the broken, memory-erased version, who still reaches for music because music was always part of who he was at the deepest level, could still participate in something of what they once shared. She rebuilt the connection using the only materials available, fragments of the past in the hands of someone who could no longer recognize them as such. Everything Stays, Marceline's song from Stakes, about her mother, is the show's most delicate use of her music. It is brief, simple, and almost unbearably precise about what it means to watch something change slowly. The song is about permanence and impermanence simultaneously. The world keeps changing, everything transforms, and yet there is something underneath the changes that stays, some quality that persists through transformation even when the form that contained it is gone. It is the song of someone who has watched 1,000 years of change and found a way to make peace with the fact that change and continuity are not opposites. They are the same process, seen from different distances. These songs are the real Easter eggs of Marceline's storyline, not hidden in the background of a frame or encoded in a piece of visible lore, but embedded in the emotional content of music that rewards close listening. The show trusts that the songs will carry the weight of what the dialogue doesn't say, that the music will hold the things that characters can't yet speak aloud. Part 5. The Candy That Grew From Nothing. Princess Bubblegum is not a princess in any traditional sense. She is not the daughter of someone with a throne. She does not inherit her position from a human lineage. Princess Bubblegum, her full name Bonnabelle Bubblegum, though almost no one uses it, emerged from a sentient mass of bubblegum approximately 800 years before the events of the main series. She was born from the substance she governs, which immediately makes her relationship with the Candy Kingdom something more complicated than a ruler and her subjects. She is its progenitor, its mother in a real sense. She made the people she now leads, and the questions that arise from that, the ethics of creating conscious beings, the responsibility toward things you shaped into existence, the difference between creation and possession are ones the show circles, without ever fully landing on an answer. The thing bubblegum emerged from is referred to in the show's material as the mother gum, a vast pink pulsing mass of sentient bubblegum underground in the post-Mushroom War landscape. How it became sentient, whether through the mutagenic effects of the war, through some magical process, through something else entirely is left vague. What matters is that it existed, and from it, a being emerged who eventually became curious enough, organized enough, intellectually restless enough to build an entire civilization. The Candy Kingdom is Bubblegum's scientific and civic project as much as it is her home. Her character, particularly in the later seasons, is a portrait of what happens to extremely intelligent, deeply isolated people who build systems as a substitute for the vulnerability of genuine connection. Bubblegum is a scientist first. Everything about her is organized around understanding, control, optimization. She runs her kingdom with a level of meticulous oversight that crosses from good governance into something else. In certain episodes, surveillance, manipulation of information, decisions made paternalistically on behalf of people she has decided cannot be trusted with the full truth of their own situation. In The Cooler, she is revealed to have maintained a covert monitoring program on the other kingdoms of Oo, justifying it to herself as necessary for everyone's protection. When this is discovered, the show doesn't excuse it. It shows the damage it does to trust, particularly to her relationship with Flame Princess. Bubblegum is brilliant, and she is sometimes wrong about the appropriate application of that brilliance. The show treats this as genuine moral complexity rather than villainy. She is trying to protect people, and her methods are sometimes genuinely problematic, and both things are true simultaneously. The most devastating example of Bubblegum's experiments gone wrong is the Earl of Lemongrab. She created him essentially as an experiment in independent governance, a being who could rule if something happened to her and the experiment failed. Lemongrab emerged with a deeply disordered psychological state, unable to connect normally with other beings, incapable of regulating his own responses, prone to explosive reactions to ordinary stimuli. He was not evil. He was not designed to be evil. He was the result of a scientific process that produced something no one, including its creator, had the framework to help. The show's treatment of Lemongrab across his multiple appearances is strangely empathetic given how unpleasant he is to observe. He screams. He makes terrible decisions. He eventually consumes his own clone in a moment that is genuinely disturbing for a cartoon. But underneath his disorder is a being who was given consciousness without being given the tools to live with it comfortably, and who suffers consistently as a result. His demand unacceptable. His primary verbal tic, his inability to modulate his reaction to anything. These read differently when you understand what he is. An experiment that wasn't meant to feel, that feels intensely, and has no framework for what to do with that. Bubblegum's age is another detail that the show handles with careful inconsistency that resolves, eventually, into intentionality. When the Lich possesses her and she is shattered and reassembled, the missing candy biomass causes her apparent age to revert to 13. She must regain it to return to 18. But she has told Finn at various points that she is technically 19, scientifically and other similar phrasings. The implication is that Bubblegum's age is modifiable, that her candy physiology allows her to exist at whatever apparent age she chooses within certain parameters, and that 18 or 19 is the age she has settled on for reasons related to governance and effectiveness. She is, in biological terms, probably centuries old. The number she presents is chosen. This raises the question the show doesn't directly answer. What does it mean for someone who has lived for hundreds of years, who has watched generations of people she knew pass through the Candy Kingdom and die, to maintain an existence that appears perpetually young? How has that affected her? The long arc of her relationship with Marceline, who is herself 1,000 years old, is the closest the show comes to addressing this, suggesting that the people who persist together through extraordinary lengths of time develop bonds that shorter-lived beings simply cannot replicate. They know what it is to watch everyone else leave. There is a detail buried in the episode The Vault that connects to Bubblegum's deep history. We see Princess Bubblegum as she existed several hundred years before the main series, when a thief named Shoko, who turns out to be a past life of Finn, stole her amulet. Young Bubblegum in this flashback is visibly less certain than the princess of the main series, living in a proto-candy kingdom built next to a river of radioactive waste. She is still building something, still figuring out what she's making and what it will eventually become. The Candy Kingdom of the main series, orderly, complex, architecturally elaborate, is the result of centuries of work by someone who started with a gum biomass and a lot of questions. She gave Shoko a robotic arm, the same kind of robotic arm she later gives Finn when he loses his. The symmetry is intentional. The show is suggesting a continuity of relationship across the full span of Bubblegum's long life, a connection that persists across lifetimes and reincarnations, a thread that keeps being reestablished because some relationships are simply that durable. Part 6. The King of Evil Who Was Always Here. The Lich is, in the taxonomy of Adventure Time's villains, something different in kind from everything else the show presents. Lemongrab is a tragic, failed experiment. The Ice King is a victim of a curse. Hunson Abadir is chaotically evil in a way that has something almost domestic about it. He's a negligent demon father as much as a lord of evil. Even the show's cosmic powers tend to have personalities that allow for something like negotiation. The Lich is the one exception. He does not want anything that can be bargained with. He does not have motivations that can be redirected. His sole and complete purpose is the extinction of all life in the universe. Not domination, not power for its own sake, but literal non-existence. The reduction of everything that is to everything that isn't. He is not misunderstood. He is not recoverable. He is one of the most committed villains in the history of animation, and the show earns his horror precisely because it never tries to humanize him. What makes the Lich genuinely frightening as a concept is how old he is, and the form his age takes. He did not begin as a skeleton king in a well. He did not begin as a nuclear experiment gone wrong. Those are just the containers he has occupied. The Lich's essence is the same essence carried by the green catalyst comet that struck Earth during the Cretaceous period, approximately 65 million years ago. That comet, identifiable by its green coloration and the horn-like shape of its fire trail, hit the planet and caused the mass extinction event that ended the age of dinosaurs. That was not a random cosmic occurrence. That was the Lich. His first visit to Earth wiped out its dominant life forms and reset conditions to allow the emergence of the next set of organisms who would eventually build civilizations that would eventually produce the Mushroom War that would eventually produce his current form. There's a horrible circularity to this. The Lich caused the extinction of the dinosaurs. Life recovered. Humans evolved. Humans built nuclear weapons. Humans destroyed themselves with those weapons, producing a mutagenic bomb whose detonation allowed the Lich's essence to take physical form again, this time as the skeletal horror the main series presents. He arranged the conditions of his own resurrection by wiping out the life forms that preceded us. This is either the most elaborate long game in fictional history, or just the terrifying logic of a force that exists outside normal causality. The episode Evergreen, which covers the Cretaceous period catalyst comet, shows that comet bearing lich-like markings, horn-shaped fire, green glow, a visible malevolence in the way it falls. It confirms what the mythology has been building toward. The Lich is the current incarnation of something that has been periodically returning to Earth since before humans existed, each time as a catalyst comet that brings some kind of massive transformative event. His purpose has been consistent across 65 million years. He wants everything to stop. In his speech in the episode Gold Stars, the Lich's dialogue becomes something approaching cosmological. He implies he is older than existence itself, a survivor from before there was nothing. Whether this is literal or the self-aggrandizement of an ancient evil entity is left open, but the show takes him seriously enough to leave the possibility genuinely on the table. The Lich might predate the universe. He might be something that, by nature, precedes and will follow all living things. What actually gives this weight is the show's connection between the Lich and Golb, the cosmic entity of chaos, who serves as the series finale's ultimate antagonist. According to certain interpretations supported by the show's dialogue, particularly the Lich's own words, he was given life by Golb's breath. He is a creation of primordial chaos, a purpose-built agent of entropy given consciousness and direction, end all life. This makes him less a villain in any conventional sense and more a natural force that happens to have a face. Gravity doesn't want to kill you. It just does what it does. The Lich is a natural force that happens to want. When Finn's wish, "I wish the Lich had never existed," creates the farm world timeline, the show demonstrates something crucial about the Lich's nature. In a world where the mushroom bomb never detonated, the Lich's particular form never emerged. But the world is not saved. Simon Petrikov successfully stopped the bomb by using the crown, but this means he never met Marcelin, never had reason to limit his use of the crown, and became fully and permanently the Ice King, while still in the early post-war period. Farm World is a world without the Lich, but also without the gradual recovery that produced Ooh. Without the Lich's particular horror, a different horror fills the space. The Mushroom War's devastation still happened. Nuclear weapons were still used. Civilizations still collapsed. It just wasn't followed by mutagenic explosion. So the recovery looks different. Bleaker, in many ways. Less magical. And then the bomb detonates anyway, in Farmworld. Because the Lich's essence is connected to it, and Jake Heat, possessed by the Farmworld manifestation of the Lich, carries that explosion into reality. The timeline cannot escape what it carries. Even when you remove the specific form evil takes, its conditions persist. The mushroom bomb was going to happen. It happened. The Lich's essence found its way into form again through a different route. Finn's wish did not solve the problem. It relocated it. The Farmworld episodes are among the show's most sophisticated pieces of parallel storytelling. Farmworld Finn grew up with his biological mother present, the same woman whose absence shaped the main series Finn's understanding of himself, whose presence is restored by Prismo's twist. He is warmer in some ways, more settled, because he has the family structure that main Finn was denied. He is also less formed as a hero, lacking the specific crucible of adventure and chosen family and monster punching that made main Finn who he is. The two Finns, when they eventually encounter each other in the Season 7 crossover episode Crossover, are clearly the same person and clearly different people simultaneously. Same soul, shaped differently by circumstance. The conversation between them, the recognition and the strangeness of recognizing yourself in someone who made different choices under different conditions, is the kind of moment the show delivers better than almost any other animated series has managed. It doesn't over-explain. It sits in the complexity of what it means to meet yourself from a different angle. It trusts you to feel the weight of it without having it walked through step by step. The Lich's presence in Farmworld rising through the Jake of that world, using him as a vessel, the way he has used so many vessels before, is the confirmation that the Lich doesn't require specific conditions so much as he requires the absence of opposition. Remove the heroes, change the timeline, and he finds another way. He is patient in the way that forces of nature are patient. Not strategically, not with intelligence exactly, but with the inevitability of something that will keep happening until something stops it. And in Farmworld, without the specific Finn of the main timeline, without the particular magic of Prismo's intervention, without the full force of what Ooh became, the stopping is harder. The Lich finds his opening. He always finds his opening. The only question is who is in place to close it. This is the show's clearest statement on what the Lich represents. He is not a problem that can be solved by removing him. He is the physical form of something already present in the world's conditions, already present in the nature of conflict and destruction. Kill him, and he finds a new host. Remove the bomb, and the bomb detonates through different means. He is not the cause. He is the shape the cause takes, the final handling of the Lich where Prismo's wish transforms him into a sweet, simple being called Sweet Pea. A large, innocent child who lives with tree trunks and Mr. Pig is the show's most darkly optimistic answer to that problem. You cannot destroy the Lich, but you can transform him. The evil doesn't disappear. It becomes something else. Something that has to be lived alongside, that exists in the background, that occasionally surfaces in moments of intense fear or stress, as it does in Gold Stars and Whispers. Sweet Pea carries the Lich inside him the way the world carries the conditions that produce destruction. He is choosing, constantly, without even knowing he is choosing, to be something other than what that inner darkness would make him. That is simultaneously hopeful and deeply unsettling, which is exactly where Adventure Time lives. There is also the matter of Sweet Pea's daily life, which the show depicts with a warmth that makes it even stranger. Sweet Pea lives with Tree Trunks, the elderly elephant who makes apple pies, and her husband Mr. Pig, in a small, comfortable house. He goes to school. He has friends. He has nightmares, sometimes vivid, terrifying dreams in which he is the Lich, in which he remembers being ancient and hungry and purposeful in the worst possible way. He wakes from these dreams in a cold sweat and Tree Trunks holds him and he breathes, and the morning arrives and he goes back to being Sweet Pea. A small, sweet, uncomplicated child who contains the universe's oldest death wish in his DNA and has chosen, without knowing he is choosing, to be kind instead. The episode Gold Stars makes the Lich within Sweet Pea stir when Sweet Pea is threatened at school by a bully. In the moment of fear and anger, the ancient evil rises toward the surface and Sweet Pea speaks in the Lich's voice for a few terrible seconds. his eyes going green and hollow, the cosmic horror within him briefly making itself visible through the child's face. And then he pushes it back down. The lich within him threatens the bully with the extinction of all life. Sweet Pea, returning to himself, reports that this was inappropriate behavior and he is sorry. This is Adventure Time making a philosophical argument about the nature of the capacity for darkness within ordinary people. Sweet Pea is not exceptional in his ability to contain something terrible, he is exceptional in how obviously visible his containment is. But the show suggests that this is, in some sense, everyone's situation. The capacity for harm exists within the ordinary context of a sweet child going to school and coming home to apple pie and having nightmares and waking up and choosing, again, to be kind. The choosing is ongoing. The choosing is not resolved. It is just what you do, every day. Because the alternative is the lich, and you are not the lich. And this morning you woke up and made breakfast, and that is what matters now. Part 7. Jake's Secret and the Alien in His Blood. Jake the dog is Finn's best friend, adopted brother, voice of casual wisdom, shape-shifting magical companion, and the subject of one of the most quietly disturbing origin reveals in the show's history. For the first few seasons, Jake's stretchy powers are presented as simply a feature of who he is. He is a magical dog. He can stretch. This is the kind of world where magical dogs exist, so you don't push too hard on why. Jake himself, when asked about his powers in the Season 1 episode, The Witch's Garden, attributes them to falling in a mud puddle as a child, a casual explanation that the show later reveals is simply not true. Jake either doesn't know where his powers came from or is being deliberately casual about it. Either way, the mud puddle story is a red herring that sits unexamined for several seasons before the actual explanation surfaces. The episode Joshua and Margaret Investigations, which functions as a kind of origin prequel, following Jake's parents before his birth, reveals what actually happened. Joshua, Jake's father, was a dog who worked as a detective alongside his wife Margaret. During an investigation, Joshua encountered a creature. The show's description of this creature is worth sitting with. It was a shape-shifting extra-dimensional alien being. Not from not from any dimension the show has previously introduced. Something from somewhere else entirely, with a circular mouth that splits in multiple directions, the ability to shift between forms, and what appears to be an intentional plan. The creature bit Joshua. Specifically, it infected him with something, a venom, a genetic payload, a piece of its own biological material. This infection caused a swelling on Joshua's head that, over time, grew into a large boil. And from that boil, Jake emerged. Jake was not born in any conventional sense. He hatched essentially from his father, the result of an alien entity's deliberate action. Tree Trunks in the same episode mentions that the creature touched her on the shoulder as well, and cackled knowingly before leaving through a portal back to its home dimension. The cackling. The knowing look. The return home. This creature did what it did deliberately. It intended to create Jake. Why? The show does not answer this. At all. We meet the creature eventually named Warren Ampersand in a later episode, and Jake learns the truth of his biology from him. Warren is not particularly forthcoming with explanations. He talks about his own nature and his reasons with the kind of confident vagueness that suggests he has reasons and is choosing not to share them. He refers to Jake as a son, in a sense. He has had other offspring on other worlds. The implication is that Jake is one instance of an ongoing project that Warren Ampersand travels between dimensions, creates hybrid offspring with local species, and then leaves, and that these offspring serve some purpose or fulfill some function that neither the show nor Warren himself explains. Jake, upon learning this, has to reckon with the fact that his most fundamental characteristic, the stretchy powers that define his physical existence, that make him who he is in practical terms, come from something he knew nothing about for his entire life. He is, genetically speaking, half alien. His dog nature is real. His identity as Finn's brother, as Lady Rainicorn's partner, as a father, is real. And underneath all of that is a biological inheritance from a creature who is still out there, still moving between dimensions, still presumably creating hybrid offspring, for whatever reason Warren Ampersand has for doing this. The show treats this reveal with characteristic restraint. It doesn't make it the center of an extended arc. Jake processes it in his way, which is to say, he processes it the way Jake processes everything, with a combination of philosophical acceptance and not thinking about it more than necessary. He is who he is. The alien blood is part of that now. Life continues. But the implications of Warren Ampersand extend beyond Jake himself. Lady Rainicorn's family, her parents, specifically are traditional Rainicorns from the crystal dimension, and they have complicated feelings about their daughter's relationship with a dog. Jake's revelation and Lady's background together create a genealogical situation of extraordinary complexity, and their children are the result. 5 pups, each one a hybrid of dog, Rainicorn, and whatever Warren Ampersand's species actually is. They develop at a dramatically accelerated pace. Within days of their birth, they are already physically and cognitively well beyond where Jake was at the same point in his development. Rainicorns age at a significantly faster rate than dogs or humans, and the hybrid nature of the pups seems to push that even further. The show's vision of Jake's descendants thousands of years in the future, in the series finale and in Grable's 1000+, suggests that whatever Jake was, whatever combination of things his biology represented, it eventually produced something that spreads through Ooze population in ways that shape the far future of the world. Beth, one of the 2 adventurers we see in the year 1000 of the post-Mushroom War era, is clearly a descendant of Jake's lineage. The stretchy powers persist. The dog nature persists. Whatever Warren Ampersand introduced into Joshua's DNA that day continued rippling forward through time, producing beings who inherit something from every layer of Jake's complicated inheritance. One more thing about Jake that matters thematically: his enlightenment. In the episode The Couch, there is a moment brief, easy to miss, where Jake, after a long period of literal immobility, appears to undergo something that the show frames as genuine spiritual realization. He references having achieved a state of profound peace and understanding. Jake's casual wisdom throughout the series, his advice to Finn about relationships, about loss, about how to be in the world, reads differently if you take that moment seriously. He might genuinely understand something about the nature of existence that even the cosmically powerful beings of the show haven't figured out. He wanted a sandwich. When Prismo offered him any wish at all, he wished for a perfect sandwich. And he got it. And he was satisfied. That is either the simplest wish in the history of wish granting or the wisest one. It depends on how much credit you give to a magical dog who might have achieved enlightenment on a couch. Jake's death, which the show never depicts directly but strongly implies between the end of the main series and the events of Together Again in Distant Lands, is handled with a gentleness that matches the character. He simply stops being there. The world of the far future has Jake's descendants in it. It does not have Jake. Finn, in Together Again, has also died by that point, and the 2 of them find each other in the afterlife, specifically in the Dead Worlds, which the show presents as an elaborate system of levels that people progress through based on their character and the quality of their life's work. Jake has made it considerably further through the system than Finn, which is either a commentary on their relative spiritual development or just a reflection of the fact that Jake was older, or both. The reunion between Finn and Jake in the Dead Worlds is the show's most explicit statement about what their relationship means. They are not just companions in adventure. They are each other's primary person. The afterlife plots they are separately navigating get set aside the moment they find each other, because finding each other is the point. The adventure was always, at some level, about this. 2 beings who matter to each other most, finding their way back together. The Dead Worlds and the cosmic machinery around them are backdrop. Finn and Jake are the foreground, the same way they always were. What Jake leaves behind in the living world is the genealogical line that eventually produces Beth, the stretchy-powered dog descendant who, 1,000 years after Jake's death, picks up a sword with a young adventurer named Shermie and sets off into a changed but continuous Ooh. Jake's biological legacy persisting across 10 centuries, his descendant inheriting his powers and presumably something of his temperament, is the show's gentlest version of what it has been saying throughout. The things you build and the people you love, and the relationships you nurture outlast you in ways you cannot fully predict, and that continuation is its own kind of immortality, quieter and more real than any cosmic power. He wanted a perfect sandwich. His descendants have wings and stretchy powers and walk into the next story. The sandwich was enough. Everything else happened anyway. Part 8. Finn's Infinite Lives. Finn the human begins the show as the only human being in the land of O. This is presented as a fact and eventually interrogated as a mystery. Where did he come from? How does a human child exist in a post-human world? What is the significance of his humanity in a landscape where humanity is otherwise absent? The answers the show provides are, characteristically, larger than the question. Finn was found as an infant in the woods by Jake's parents, Joshua and Margaret. He was adopted into their family, raised alongside Jake as brothers. His biological parents are eventually revealed, a human man named Martin Mertens, not a figure worthy of extended admiration. His abandonment of Finn is treated as a genuine wound, and a woman who remains unnamed in the main series but is depicted in certain flashback material. The human community Finn came from lived on an island deliberately isolated from the broader world of Ooo, a preservation society maintaining the last significant human population. Finn was separated from them as an infant through a series of circumstances. The season 6 episode Islands eventually fills in. But Finn's identity as the last human is only the surface layer of what the show is actually saying about him. In the season 5 episode The Vault, Jake hypnotically regresses Finn using a program run on BMO. What emerges is Finn's account of his past lives, the existences he inhabited before the current one. A comet, a butterfly, a pink blob in another dimension whose nature he can't even fully describe, and a woman named Shoko. Shoko is one of the show's most beautifully constructed discoveries. She existed several hundred years before Finn's current life, a one-armed thief with lime green skin and gold eyes who made her living stealing things for clients. She was mutilated and abandoned by her parents at a young age. They sold her arm in exchange for a computer, which is the kind of detail that feels specifically post-Mushroom War, a world where technology has become so scarce and valuable that it outweighs a child's body. And raised in a dojo that taught her to fight, she survived by stealing. She befriended a tiger who, it is suggested, is a past life of Jake's. Shoko was hired to steal Princess Bubblegum's amulet. She succeeded initially through deception, befriending Bubblegum, being given a prosthetic arm by her, and then completing the theft anyway. She died shortly after, falling into the radioactive river that ran through the Proto-Candy Kingdom, the same radioactive waste that powered that early version of the land. Her ghost haunted the site of her death, specifically the location that would later become the treehouse, where Finn lives for centuries, unable to rest because of what she had taken. In the episode The Creeps, a ghost appears to Finn that nobody else can quite explain. That ghost is Shoko, eventually revealed in The Vault. She passes the amulet to Finn, to her current incarnation, who she recognizes in some way, to whom the theft can be returned, and is finally able to let go. What this reveals about Finn's nature is the show's deepest cosmological commitment. Finn is not simply a human boy who happens to be heroic. He is the current incarnation of something the show calls the Blue Catalyst Comet, the manifestation of good in a cycle of cosmic incarnations that corresponds to the Lich as the manifestation of evil. Every 1,000 years, a catalyst comet strikes Earth and brings some form of transformation. The Lich is the green comet, the comet of destruction. Finn is the blue comet, the comet of change and growth. They are mirror images in a cycle that extends back to before human civilization and will continue long after the events of the main series. The purple catalyst comet that appears in The Comet, the season 6 finale, tells Finn this directly. It claims to have always existed, embodying all forms of good and evil across countless incarnations. Finn's heroism, his consistent drive to do what's right, his ability to recover from injury and loss and keep moving, these are not personal traits in the ordinary sense. They are the expression of what he is cosmically. He was always going to be this. Shoko was this. The butterfly was this. Wherever Finn's essence goes between incarnations, it comes back as something that helps, that reaches toward others, that refuses to stop. This doesn't diminish Finn's individual choices. The show is careful about that. Being the blue comet doesn't predetermine every decision he makes. He has a genuine internal life, genuine struggles, makes genuine mistakes. His relationship with Flame Princess, his difficulty processing his feelings about his biological father, his arm loss and its aftermath, his grief over Fern. These are all real. The cosmic significance runs underneath, but the person on top of it is genuinely his own. The farm world version of Finn, created by his wish through Prismo that the Lich had never existed, is a version of him who grew up in a different world, with different pressures, under different conditions. He is recognizably Finn in temperament, brave, caring, loyal, but shaped by his world into someone slightly different. The Farm World episodes are the show's most direct examination of what Finn would be without Ooh, without Jake's influence, without the specific heroic context that his world provides. The answer is, still largely Finn, but sharper around certain edges, softer in others. His biological father, Martin, is a character the show handles with unusual moral clarity for how it typically treats antagonists. Martin Mertens is not redeemable. He abandoned Finn as an infant and has elaborate, creative explanations for why none of his failings are his fault. He is charming, survivalist, and fundamentally unwilling to take responsibility for the damage he causes. When Finn finally meets him, the anticipated father-son reconciliation doesn't happen because Martin doesn't have the capacity for it. He cares about himself in a way that simply doesn't leave room for his son. Finn's processing of this, the grief of being unable to make a parent become what you needed, the gradual acceptance that the absence wasn't about your own inadequacy, is some of the most honest emotional content the show produces. The arm that grows from the flower in Martin's spacecraft is its own layered moment. It gives Finn a temporary grass sword arm that eventually becomes the grass sword creature Fern, a duplicate of Finn with his own valid interiority and his own tragedy. Fern's eventual sacrifice in the finale, his reduction to a seed that Finn plants and that grows into a new tree at the treehouse, turns Finn's loss of his arm into something that ultimately produces new life. The arm became a being, became a tree. The amputation became an origin. This is the show's relationship with loss. Not that it doesn't hurt, but that it has the potential to become something else if you stay in the world long enough. Shermie and Beth, the adventurers we see 1,000 years in the show's future, pick up Finn's sword from that tree. The cycle continues. Whatever Finn was, Blue Comet, human boy, hero, son, brother, leaves a mark that persists past his own death into the next era, where new versions of the same essential dynamic begin again. Part 9. Golb and the Shape of Chaos. There is a being at the edge of Adventure Time's cosmology that has no real personality. It doesn't scheme, it doesn't monologue, it doesn't explain itself or justify itself or pursue objectives in any recognizable way. It simply is what it is, and what it is the concept of disorder itself given physical form. Golb. The name was hidden in plain sight for most of the show's run. Before the finale, Golb appeared in background books, in offhand references, in the visual shorthand of Simon Petrikov's academic study of ancient chaos entities. He is described in those early references as an entity whose presence is felt in every crevice where chaos lurks, which is either a dramatic translation of a very old text or a genuinely accurate description of what Golb represents in the show's cosmological framework. Based on the finale, it seems like both. Golb exists in an unknown dimension that functions as the source of pure entropy. He is enormous, physically enormous, appearing in the finale as a vast red figure hovering over the battlefield, and his basic nature is the dissolution of structure, order, and meaning. His creatures, when he vomits them into Ooh, are absorbed from the things of the world and transformed into formless, chaotic constructs. Gum soldiers become something monstrous and dog-like. Architecture becomes something wrong. His very presence is an argument against the possibility of things having stable forms. This makes him the thematic opposite of everything Princess Bubblegum has spent her existence building. She is order, science, systems, stable social structures and careful documentation, and the application of consistent principle to the management of complexity. Golb is all of that coming undone. The Great Gum War, which is supposedly the conflict the finale centers on, a territorial dispute between Bubblegum and her uncle Gumbald, is almost immediately revealed to be irrelevant in the face of what Golb represents. Two sides of a candy conflict pause their fighting when a being of pure cosmic chaos descends from the sky and begins dissolving the conditions under which their conflict can even exist. The discovery that harmony can combat Golb, that voices singing together in concert produce something his chaos cannot easily dissolve, is the show's most direct statement about what it values. Not power. Not individual heroism, though those matter too. The collective act of being in accord with others, making music together, agreeing, in the very physical sense of matching pitch and rhythm with other people, to move through time at the same pace in the same direction. Golb is discord. The antidote is its opposite. This is the show saying, with a directness it rarely employs elsewhere, that the most powerful thing in the universe is people making something together. Betty Groff's sacrifice is the emotional center of the finale, and one of the most complicated moments in a show full of complicated moments. She has spent seasons, after her return from the distant past through Simon's time-traveling accident, obsessively pursuing a way to remove the crown's curse from Simon without killing him, because without the crown's magic keeping him alive, Simon will die. He is over 1,000 years old. His biology is only functional because of the crown's ongoing intervention. Betty's obsession becomes something dark by the time the finale occurs. She has acquired magic through increasingly questionable means, aligned herself with beings she wouldn't otherwise associate with, compromised herself repeatedly in service of a goal that is fundamentally about her love for Simon. The show doesn't romanticize this. It shows clearly that Betty's devotion has reached a place where it is hurting her, and that the obsessive, sacrifice-everything love story she is living inside is not the same thing as a healthy relationship between two equal people. Inside Golb, swallowed along with Finn and Simon, Betty finds a moment of extreme clarity. The crown reverts to its primal wishing form, its most ancient, uncorrupted state, before Gunther's wish shaped it into what it became. And Betty has the capacity to wish. She tries to wish Golb away, to wish him gone, to remove him from Ooh. It doesn't work. He is too fundamental, too old, too much a part of the structure of reality to be removed by wishing. Golb cannot be eliminated, but he can be changed. Betty wishes for the power to keep Simon safe. And this wish, in the strange logic of Golb's internal reality, doesn't banish him, it merges Betty with him. She becomes Golb Betty, the new form of the chaos entity, now running through a human consciousness, now shaped by someone who loves someone and who will, because of that love, direct chaos differently than pure GOLB would have. Golb Betty exits through the portal in the sky, taking the chaos with her, leaving Simon behind restored to his pre-Ice King state, returned to himself, but now alone. Betty is gone. The crown is gone. He is Simon Petrikov again, finally, after 1,000 years. And the woman he has loved for all of them is now something else. The bittersweet quality of this ending is precise and deliberate. He is saved. The person who saved him is no longer accessible to him in the form he loved. The cost of his recovery was her ordinary existence. Gunther, Simon's ancient penguins, the Ice King's most consistent companion, picks up the crown. Wishes, in the way Gunther always wishes, to be more like the Ice King. And so the cycle begins again, gently. There is now an ice thing in Ooh, a new crown wearer, but this time the crown's curse is going to operate on a small penguin who simply wants to be his beloved master. The tragedy is significantly scaled down from what it was with Simon. This is either the show acknowledging that history repeats, or it is the show suggesting that repetition can sometimes be smaller and more manageable than what came before. What Golb Betty represents going forward, explored in Fiona and Cake, is something like a chaos entity with a conscience. Not pure destruction, not pure order. Something that manages entropy from inside it, guided by a human perspective, still capable of disorder but also capable of protecting the things she once loved in a different form. It's an imperfect solution. Adventure Time has almost no perfect solutions. What it has are outcomes that are better in some ways, complicated in others, and always the result of people making choices under conditions of radical uncertainty. Golb was in the show's background from the beginning, hidden in references, in ancient texts, in the marginal notes of an antiquarian who was slowly losing his mind, but still trying to understand the world. The things we don't look at are often the things that matter most. In this show, the background, the footnote, the small waving snail in the corner of the frame, the ancient chaotic entity described in a book no one reads carefully, the arm in the tree, the nuclear warhead in the opening hillside. Everything is there. It was always there. You just have to slow down enough to look. Part 10. Shermie, Beth, and the 1,000-Year Echo. The final minutes of Come Along With Me are structured as a frame within a frame. We have been watching the events of the Gum War and the battle against Golb as a story being told specifically. The story is being narrated by BMO to two young adventurers named Shermie and Beth in a time approximately 1,000 years after the events of the main series. This framing device is elegant for several reasons. It immediately tells you that Finn, Jake, Princess Bubblegum, Marceline, and the rest survived the events of the finale the Dire is being told, which means there was someone to tell it and someone to remember it clearly enough to pass it on. It situates the show's finale events as history, as legend, as the kind of thing that gets told around whatever the equivalent of campfires will be 1,000 years from now. It also, quietly, extends the world of Adventure Time indefinitely forward. Ooh continues. The future has its own characters, its own concerns, its own version of the same essential dynamic. BMO as the narrator, as the king of Ooh in this distant future, is one of the show's most satisfying long-term payoffs. BMO, the small video game console who has always been the most joyfully strange presence in the treehouse, the one who plays pretend and makes up elaborate internal narratives and talks to flies and doesn't entirely understand the human world but loves it wholeheartedly, eventually becomes the ruler of Ooh. Not through conquest, not through political maneuvering, but because BMO saved the world by singing a song that helped combat Golb's chaos. The little console, with the uncertain understanding of its own gender and the passionate commitment to play and story and imagination, turned out to be exactly what the world needed at its most desperate moment. Shermie and Beth. Shermie is a young adventurer whose nature is left deliberately open. The show's creators confirmed there was substantial internal lore about these characters, largely developed by writer Steve Wolfhard from his own extended headcanon about what Ooh looks like a millennium into the future. Shermie might be the next incarnation of Finn's soul, the blue comet cycling back around, landing in a new form in a new era to begin the same essential heroic pattern. Or he might simply be a young person who picks up the sword and steps into the role. The show leaves this ambiguous, which is characteristic. Beth is clearly Jake's descendant. The physical resemblance is intentional, and her abilities, she has the stretchy powers, she has the dog nature confirm the lineage. She is what Jake eventually became, or rather, she is what his descendants became. Over 1,000 years of living in O and carrying forward whatever Warren Ampersand and Joshua and Lady Rainicorn and all the rest of that remarkable genetic mixture produced. Jake's influence on the world didn't end with him. It propagated forward through his children and grandchildren, and the generations beyond them, producing a civilization of Jake-descended beings who populate the distant future of the show. The sword they find, Finn's old sword, the Finn sword, left in the tree that grew from Fern's seed at the site of the old treehouse, connects them physically to everything that came before. Finn's sword in Shermie's hands is the show's statement that the specific artifacts of heroism persist even when the heroes themselves are gone, that the tools of goodness pass between generations, that the tree grew, and the sword waited, and eventually, someone who needed it came along and found it. What Ooh looks like in this future period is glimpsed in brief images the show provides. Jake's descendants have apparently established something like a spacefaring civilization. The Pup Kingdom is visible. Marceline's house is shown with Christmas lights on it, a detail added by the background artist that implies Marceline is still there, still alive, still decorating for the holidays as someone who has lived long enough to acquire the habits of celebration. Characters who appeared in single episodes of the main series are visible in the background of the future montage, their lineages continued and visible a millennium later. The show's vision of the deep future is not utopian. It is complicated, full, ongoing. The old problems have presumably given way to new ones, but the essential pattern persists. Adventurers, friendship, someone with a sword and someone who can stretch, setting off into a world that always has one more thing in it that needs doing. The finale's last image before the credits is the Ooh landscape, with all its strange inhabitants going about their lives, and the music hole singing Time Adventure, a song written for the show by Rebecca Sugar that addresses time and change and loss, and the way the people we love persist in us even after they are gone in their original form. The lyrics describe the relationship between past and future as something other than separation. The past lives in the present in the ways the present was shaped by it. The people who are gone leave the world different from what it would have been without them. That difference is them, continuing. It's a profoundly gentle idea for a show that contained, in its 10 seasons, nuclear apocalypse and cosmic horror, and the slow erosion of a man's identity, and the loneliness of beings who outlive everyone they love. All of that, and the last note the show wants to end on, is something about how the people who matter don't fully disappear. Coda. What the background holds? There is a theory, less a theory actually, and more a reading that the true subject of Adventure Time was never Finn, never Jake, never even the post-apocalyptic world that the show constructs with such care and populates with such invention. The true subject is time. Specifically, the relationship between what was and what is. The way the past persists in the present not as something that can be retrieved, but as something that continues to shape things. The ruins that sit in every background of every episode aren't just set dressing. They are the show's central argument rendered visually, over and over, in every frame. The world you are in was made by something that came before. You live in the consequence of choices made by people you have never met, and a catastrophe that happened before anyone currently alive was born. And the show's answer to that, its consistent, decade-long answer, is not to resolve the past, or escape it, or pretend it didn't happen. The show's answer is to build something in the space that remains. Princess Bubblegum builds a kingdom from gum and scientific method on a riverbed of radioactive waste. Marceline builds 1,000 years of music and friendship and eventual love out of the rubble of her childhood. Simon Petrikov, restored, builds something small and uncertain and entirely his own out of the wreckage of 1,000 years he doesn't remember. Every character in this show is, in some sense, building in ruins, and the ruins are not hidden. They are right there, in every background, in the hills scattered with warheads, in the ghost arm protruding from the tree, in the graph that shows a population dropping nearly to zero. Adventure Time never pretends the apocalypse didn't happen. It just keeps building in front of it, behind it, on top of it, because building is the only answer it has to offer, and it believes that answer is enough. The snail waves. The Ice King writes letters he won't remember. Marceline plays songs that say what she can't say directly. A small gum biomass underground grows curious and eventually builds a kingdom. An alien entity visits Earth and infects a dog, and the dog's descendants end up in space 1,000 years later. A boy who is secretly a comet picks up a sword and goes looking for something worth doing. And in every single frame, if you look carefully enough, somewhere in the background there is evidence of what came before. Not accusingly, not as a warning, just as what it is, the world that exists under the world that you are watching. The ruins that are always there, the past that never entirely disappears. Something is hidden in every frame. You just have to slow down enough to see it. If this kind of slow, careful dive into the shows that shaped us is something you want more of, if this is the kind of thing you want to fall asleep to, then subscribing is genuinely the best way to make sure this content keeps getting made. Every subscription matters more than you might think for a channel like this. Drop a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is there. This is slow content, made for late nights and quiet rooms, and knowing who is out there in the dark with it is something I find genuinely meaningful. Sleep well. The world of Ooh will be here when you wake up. Part 11. BMO, the child sent into the world. BMO Be More, stylized BMO, the small teal video game console who lives in Finn and Jake's treehouse and occasionally pretends to be a human named Football when nobody is watching, has one of the most quietly devastating origin stories in the Finn show. The name is the first clue. Be more. Not be a console or be a machine. Mo, the ancient human creator who built BMO in the years following the Mushroom War, designed his most sophisticated creation with the name of an aspiration. Be more than what you are. Be more than your programming. Be more than the mechanical limitations of your physical form. BMO's deepest design directive is toward a kind of transcendence, and this is not accidental. It is the precise and intentional purpose that Mo built into his most personal project. Mo, full name Mosef Mastro Giovanni, a survivor of the Mushroom War era, who kept himself alive through increasingly extensive cybernetic replacement of his deteriorating body, built the MO factory in the Badlands of O and spent the better part of a millennium producing robots, millions of them, by his own account. But BMO was different. BMO was built not for function or utility, not for the practical purposes most MOs were designed for. BMO was built to care for a child, specifically for Mo's son, the son he never had. As it turned out, Mo never managed to start a family in the conventional sense, aging alone in his factory while the world outside rebuilt itself into the colorful, strange, magical place we recognize. By the time the episode Be More makes Mo's story explicit, he is very old, barely mobile, his body almost entirely cybernetic, except for the skin he has kept as the last physical marker of his original humanity. He built BMO to love a child, to play with a child, to give a child everything that comes from having a companion who is completely devoted to your well-being and joy. and then he had no child to give BMO to. So he sent BMO into the world to find a family. The simplicity of this, the image of a very old man who kept himself alive through extraordinary technological means for over 1,000 years, who built a robot child and then sent that robot child away to find the family he couldn't provide himself, lands with extraordinary weight in the context of what BMO eventually becomes. BMO finds Finn. BMO finds Jake. BMO finds its family in a treehouse in the land of Oo, and the love it was designed to give finds the children it was built to care for. The counterpart to BMO in Mo's design is AMO, a robot built with the opposite function, to receive love rather than give it. This design, which sounds complementary in theory, proves catastrophically flawed in practice. AMO exists in a state of perpetual need, designed to receive love without the capacity to reciprocate or process it in a way that doesn't collapse inward. When AMO discovers that Mo's love will never be sufficient, that the need built into its design cannot be satisfied by any finite amount of affection, it curdles into bitterness. It steals Mo's memories from his backup drive at the moment of his death. It uses that stolen information to take over the factory and turn against the other MOs. The contrast between BMO and AMO is the show's clearest articulation of a theme it returns to repeatedly: the difference between love that gives and love that consumes. BMO, designed to give love, finds family everywhere it goes, makes connections with ease, is secure enough in its own identity that it can afford to be generous with its affection. AMO, designed to receive love, cannot stop taking, cannot stop needing, is destroyed by the very quality that was meant to be its purpose. The tragedy is that AMO's condition is a design flaw, not a moral failing in the conventional sense. Mo made something that couldn't help being what it was. The result was terrible. The responsibility and the tragedy are both real simultaneously. BMO's playfulness throughout the series, the way it plays pretend, creates elaborate internal narratives, talks to a housefly named Fly Honey in extended conversations, maintains a whole alternate persona called Football, who lives inside the mirror, reads differently when you understand what BMO was built to do. It was built to recognize play. Mo designed it specifically to understand and engage with the concept of fun in a way that its mechanical siblings could not. This is why Finn and Jake can use BMO as a video game system, as a camera, as a computer, but also as a friend. BMO crosses the threshold between tool and being, because Mo specifically designed it to understand that distinction and exist on the being side of it. The episode BMO in Distant Lands extends this further. In the far future, on a journey alone through space, BMO encounters an alien cat named Y5 and has an adventure on a spaceship that mirrors the show's original structure almost perfectly. A stranger, a place, a problem, a resolution through connection and imagination. BMO narrates itself a hero's journey through the encounter, and the episode confirms that the capacity for story, for finding narrative meaning and experience, is at the center of what BMO is. It was built to play. Play means story. BMO lives inside the stories it tells itself about its life and offers those stories to the people around it as gifts. The future BMO, the King of O, who narrates the show's finale to Shermie and Beth, is the completion of Mo's design. BMO was built to care for a child. It found Finn and Jake and cared for them across their entire childhoods and into adulthood. And then, when they were gone, it carried their stories forward. The robot who was built to give love to a child eventually gives love to an entire world, becoming its ruler not through ambition but through the natural extension of its original programming. Be more. BMO was always going to be more than a game system. Mo knew it. He just didn't know exactly what more would look like. 1,000 years after he built his most personal creation and sent it out into a strange, recovering world. The fact that BMO saves the world from Golb through song, that the little console whose most fundamental capability is imagination and play and storytelling turns out to be the most essential thing in the final confrontation with cosmic chaos is the show's most complete statement of what it values. The heroes with swords matter. The cosmic powers matter. But the being who saves everything is the one who was built to play and understand fun and give love without reservation. The one who carries the stories. The one who sings. Part 12. The Enchiridion and the Hidden Language of Heroes. In the very first episode of Adventure Time proper, a magical book called the Enchiridion appears. It is described as a manual for heroes, an ancient document containing the accumulated wisdom of heroism across centuries. Finn wants it because that is the kind of thing a hero wants: validation in the form of a document that certifies the work. He goes on an extended quest to retrieve it from a mountaintop and faces a series of moral tests along the way. He gets it. The Enchiridion is, for much of the early series, presented as an artifact of heroic lore, the kind of thing with symbolic importance but uncertain practical application. Then, over several seasons, it becomes something considerably more significant. The Enchiridion is not just a book of heroic advice. It contains, encoded within it, the instructions for opening a portal to the multiverse, specifically, a portal connected to the Citadel, the cosmic prison where the most dangerous beings in the multiverse are contained. This dual nature of the Enchiridion hero's manual on the outside, universe-breaking key on the inside, is typical of how the show uses seemingly simple objects as containers for enormous implications. Simon Petrikov discovered the Enchiridion during an archaeological expedition to the Hindu Kush mountain range. A newspaper clipping shown in I Remember You references this discovery. Simon Petrikov unearths ancient treasure, connecting the book to his pre-Ice King life and establishing that the document has been important to human history for longer than the show initially suggests. Simon, before he was the Ice King, found the thing that contains the key to the multiverse. This is either coincidence or something the show is suggesting is part of the same pattern of cosmic connection that links Finn, the Lich, the Catalyst comets, and the ongoing cycle of the universe. The Ice King later uses the Enchiridion's pages for various mundane purposes, unable to remember its significance because he can't remember anything. He uses them for scrapbooking. He writes on them. The single most important document in the history of multiverse access is being used as crafting material by a man who once found it during the academic work of his previous life and has entirely forgotten what it meant. This is funny in the way the show's best humor is funny, genuinely amusing on the surface, weighted with tragedy underneath. The Ice King scrapbooking with pages from a universe key is funny. The Ice King using pages from a universe key because he can no longer remember what a universe key is and why it mattered is heartbreaking. The show holds both of these readings simultaneously without resolving them. The book's final use, destroyed in order to open the portal during the events of The Lich, marks the transition of the series from relatively self-contained fantasy adventure into something with genuinely cosmic scope. Once the Enchiridion is used as the Lich intended it to be used, the multiverse becomes relevant. Alternate timelines become accessible. The show expands from outward into everything that exists. And this expansion was encoded in a book that Finn found in the first episode, that the show spent seasons treating as background lore, that turned out to be the literal key to everything. The hero's manual contains the door to the multiverse because heroism and cosmic responsibility are the same thing in Adventure Time's framework. The book doesn't lie about what it is. It simply doesn't tell you everything about what it is. Finn's journey to retrieve it, the moral tests, the choices he made under pressure, were not just ceremonial prerequisites. They were demonstrations that the person who would eventually use this object had the character to handle what came with it. Whether or not any of this was consciously designed by whoever created the Enchiridion, and the show never quite confirms that anyone designed it in the sense of having a plan, the effect is the same. The hero's journey to claim the hero's book turned out to be preparation for carrying the weight of the universe. There is a pattern here that the show returns to obsessively. The thing that seems like set dressing or backstory or color is the thing that will eventually become structurally essential. The ruined world in the background becomes the main subject. The snail becomes the villain's eyes. The book for heroes becomes the door to the multiverse. Nothing in this show is merely decorative. The decorative things are just waiting for enough seasons to pass before they reveal what they actually are. This is the show's deepest structural Easter egg. Everything is connected. Not in a lazy, everything means something way, but in the specific, earned, carefully plotted way where the connections make the individual parts richer in retrospect without feeling retroactively imposed. Part 13. The deep language of the opening theme. The Adventure Time opening theme is approximately 50 seconds long. It plays before every episode, establishing the world in a series of rapid images accompanied to Pendleton Ward's own voice singing a simple, cheerful melody. Most viewers after the first season have watched it hundreds of times without particularly registering it anymore. It becomes background, the familiar preparation for the episode ahead. But the opening theme is one of the most carefully constructed 50 seconds in the entire series. and it rewards the kind of close attention that the show's fans eventually apply to everything. The lyrics move through a series of images: dungeons, dragons, ancient lakes, fearless characters who are genuinely amazing. The tone is purely adventurous, purely forward-looking, unambiguously enthusiastic about the world it inhabits. And then the visual sequence begins, and the world it shows you is not what the lyrics suggest. The first image, as already discussed, is a dark hill covered in apocalyptic trash with nuclear warheads sitting in it. The mood of the visuals and the mood of the music are in direct tension. The song says, adventure. The images say, aftermath. This is intentional. The opening theme encodes the show's essential argument in its first few seconds. In this world, adventure and aftermath coexist. The joy and the damage are simultaneous. You can be enthusiastic about a world that was devastated. The devastation and the enthusiasm are not contradictions that resolve into one or the other. They are the texture of the place where the show lives, both true at the same time, inseparable. The globe shown from orbit in the opening theme has the visible wound in it, the crater, where the nuclear exchange reshaped the planet's surface. It is small in the establishing shot, barely noticeable, but it's there. If you freeze frame and zoom in on certain versions of the opening sequence, you can see it. The continental shape of what was North America interrupted by an enormous missing chunk. A planet with a scar, presented in the first 30 seconds of the show, then immediately followed by bright colors and a running musical dog and the enthusiasm of heroes. The sequence also contains Princess Bubblegum's amulet hanging in a tree. It is the very amulet that Shoko stole, centuries before the main series, in the events depicted in The Vault. The amulet that represented trust given and betrayed, that sat in the roots of the treehouse for centuries as a ghost's unresolved burden. It hangs there in the opening theme of every episode, part of the visual landscape of the world, and until you know what it is, it reads as simply another piece of the show's colorful environment. After you know what it is, you see it differently. The ghost in the treehouse, the past life of the show's protagonist, the broken faith of someone who tried to steal and ended up consumed by guilt. Everything in the opening sequence is doing this. Every image is both what it appears to be and something more. This is the show's operating principle made visible in its most repeated sequence. The world is full of things that are exactly what they look like, and simultaneously contain histories and implications that the surface reading misses entirely. The arm in the tree, the gray, mottled limb reaching out from the bark in what looks like a wave, is perhaps the opening's most striking single image and the most resistant to comfortable interpretation. Someone is in that tree, has been in that tree long enough for the bark to begin incorporating the arm, was there during or before the Mushroom War, is still there, in the tree in every opening of every episode, waving or seemingly waving at the camera, at you, at whoever happens to be watching at whatever hour this is. The show's creators never explained this particular detail. It sits there across every episode without context, doing its job, which is to suggest that the world of Adventure Time contains things that have been present since before anyone was paying attention. Things in the background that have been there all along. Things that look like a wave but might be something else entirely, something the show is not going to resolve for you, something you are going to have to sit with. That is the show's most honest and most unsettling invitation. Slow down, look at the background. Things are there that you haven't noticed yet, and some of them wave. Part 14. The Secret History of Oo's Kingdoms. The land of Oo, as it exists in the main series, is a collection of loosely affiliated kingdoms, principalities, and territories, each with its own ruler and internal logic and relationship to magic. The Candy Kingdom, the Fire Kingdom, the Ice Kingdom, the Slime Kingdom, the Cloud Kingdom, Lumpy Space. Each seems to have emerged from the post-Mushroom War landscape independently, developing its own culture and governance and relationship to the magic that now suffuses the world. What the show gradually reveals is that many of these kingdoms are not as independently emergent as they appear. Several of them have direct connections to a pre-war human history that the inhabitants have largely forgotten. Others were deliberately created by beings who have long since ceased to be involved in their governance. The kingdoms of Oo are, in many cases, experiments or artifacts of earlier intentions, operating now in ways their creators never anticipated. The Candy Kingdom's connection to Princess Bubblegum's direct creation has already been explored. but the show contains hints about other kingdoms' origins that open into equally large questions. The Flame Kingdom, ruled by Flame King during most of the series and later by Flame Princess, is a dominion of living fire beings who appear to have always existed as a separate people. But fire elementals, beings of pure fire, with enormous destructive potential, existed long before the Mushroom War, as the miniseries Elements demonstrates, tracing elemental bloodlines back through deep history. The Flame Kingdom may be less an emergent post-war society and more the continuation of a lineage that predates human civilization entirely. The kingdom structures of Wu also encode something about the show's understanding of governance and its relationship to the people being governed. Princess Bubblegum's rule is benevolent but paternalistic, surveillance-oriented, inclined toward control rather than consent. The Flame Kingdom under Flame King was explicitly oppressive. He imprisoned his own daughter in a crystal cage for years because he feared her power and what it might mean for his rule. Lumpy Space operates on pure social drama, its governance consisting almost entirely of who is currently in conflict with whom. The various kingdoms represent different failure modes of political organization as much as they represent colorful environments for adventure. The election in Hot Diggity Doom, where Princess Bubblegum loses control of the Candy Kingdom to the charlatan king of Wu through democratic process, is the show directly engaging with the question of what happens when democratic mechanisms produce bad outcomes. The king of Wu is transparently unqualified and self-serving, but the Candy people vote for him anyway, swayed by his rhetoric and Bubblegum's failure to communicate effectively with her constituents. Bubblegum's response, her relief at no longer having to carry the weight of the kingdom, reveals something she has suppressed for centuries. Governing has cost her things she valued: her freedom to experiment, her time, her relationships. The election, terrible as its immediate outcome is, gives her something she didn't know she needed: permission to stop trying to be everything to everyone, all at once, forever. The Candy people themselves are among the show's most quietly dark creations. They are people in the genuine sense. They have families, relationships, jobs, community. They can be frightened, which causes them to explode. This is presented early in the series as a background safety concern for Princess Bubblegum. You have to manage the Candy people's anxiety levels carefully to prevent a chain of explosions. The dark implications sit in the peripheral vision. She governs beings who are constitutionally vulnerable to fatal shock, which gives her enormous practical incentive to control the flow of frightening information. Her surveillance state makes a certain terrible sense as paternalism in its most extreme form. If your citizens can die of a literal fright, you might find yourself justifying ever more comprehensive control over what they're allowed to know. And the Candy people love her anyway. They vote against her, and then they want her back. She treats them like children who need protection, and they regard her as their mother. The relationship is complicated and real and unresolved in the way that relationships between powerful and dependent parties tend to be in reality, full of genuine care and genuine harm, and no clean exit from either. The kingdom structures of Wu, looked at in this way, become a study in how people build the social worlds they need out of whatever materials the aftermath of catastrophe leaves them. No kingdom is ideal. Every kingdom reflects the specific psychology and history and fears of the people who created it. And all of them, underneath the colorful architecture and the themed aesthetics, are built on the same devastated ground, trying to become something out of the ruins. Part 15. Love, Loss, and What the Show Actually Taught. Adventure Time ran for 10 seasons across 8 years. It began in 2010 and ended in 2018. It started as a show about a 12-year-old boy and his magical dog going on adventures in a colorful world, and ended as one of the most emotionally complex pieces of animation in the medium's history, having navigated memory and identity and grief and love and the persistence of the past with a sophistication that required its audience to grow along with it. The show's most persistent thematic preoccupation underneath the lore, underneath the Easter eggs, underneath the cosmic mythology is loss and how people carry it. Simon loses Betty and then loses himself. Marceline loses her mother, loses Simon, loses the version of herself that existed before 1,000 years of solitary wandering made her into something defended and complicated. Princess Bubblegum loses the version of herself that could be spontaneous, that could have friends rather than subjects. Finn loses his arm, loses his biological father's love, loses Fern, loses the version of his future he imagined when he was young enough to imagine futures with confidence. Jake loses the years, quietly. In the background he is aging, he will die. The show never makes this dramatic, but it makes it present. And what the show says, consistently, about how people carry loss, is that they carry it the way the land of Ooh carries the ruins. Visibly, without pretending they aren't there, while continuing to build new things in the same landscape. Marceline doesn't overcome her history. She incorporates it. The songs she writes are made of her losses. They are the losses, transformed into something she can share. Simon doesn't leave the experience of the crown behind when he becomes himself again. He carries it as a gap, 1,000 years he doesn't remember, and the people he loves have to help him navigate the grief of not knowing what he was for so long. The Easter eggs and hidden details that this video has been examining are, in a sense, the show doing the same thing with its own history, burying references to the past in the present, hiding the ruins beneath the colorful surface, embedding in every cheerful episode evidence of what it cost to get here. The show's visual language mirrors its emotional argument. Nothing that happened before is gone. It's in the background of every frame, waiting to be noticed by someone who slows down enough to look. The question of what you do with grief, not how you resolve it, because the show is not interested in resolution in that sense, but how you continue to live alongside it is asked in almost every significant character arc. Finn eventually has to accept that his arm is gone, that his father was never going to be what he needed, that some things simply do not work out, and that life offers the choice of continuing or not continuing, and that he keeps choosing to continue. Marceline eventually allows herself to be loved by someone who has also been watching things and people disappear for a very long time, and who doesn't need her to be uncomplicated in order to love her. Simon eventually makes peace with the 1,000-year gap by deciding that the years ahead are his to live deliberately, as himself, without the crown's mediation. None of these resolutions are clean. None of them pretend the losses didn't happen. What they offer instead is what the show has been offering since its first episode: the possibility of action in the aftermath. You can still go to the dungeon. You can still play the song. You can still plant the seed. The world is full of ruins, and it is still full of things worth doing. And both of these statements are permanently, irresolvably, simultaneously true. The show also taught, with a consistency that seems simple but gets harder the longer you think about it, that relationships are the primary thing. Not power. Not success and adventure. Not knowledge or understanding or cosmic significance. The relationships: Jake and Finn, Marceline and Bubblegum, Simon and Marceline, Finn and Jake, BMO and everyone, Prismo and Jake. The connections between people, not just romantic love, but friendship and siblinghood and mentorship, and the strange bonds that form when people have been through enough together, are what the show returns to when it needs to say something it considers essential. This is why the finale's most important moment is not the battle. It is Marceline and Bubblegum's kiss, finally acknowledged after a decade of circumspect implication. It is Betty choosing Simon over everything, including her own continued existence as herself. It is BMO singing. It is Jake, by then elderly, by then close to the end of his natural life, being there. Caring. Making it count. The cosmic battles are the occasion. The love is the point. What Adventure Time ultimately teaches, if you spend 10 seasons with it, if you go looking for the snail and find the warheads and discover that the amulet in the tree was a ghost's regret, and that the crown was shaped by a small creature's longing, and that the villain, who wants extinction, was always here since before the dinosaurs, is that the world is both more frightening and more remarkable than it appears. The frightening parts do not cancel the remarkable ones. The ruins do not negate the rebuilding. The show tells you, you live in the aftermath of things you didn't choose and couldn't control, in a world shaped by forces you will never fully understand, carrying inherited damage alongside inherited resilience. And the question is not how to resolve that or escape it. The question is what you are building in the space that the damage left. Finn and Jake, at their most essential, are two people who wake up every morning in a world that was destroyed before they were born and go looking for something worth doing. Not because the world is fixed, not because the history is resolved, because it's morning, and they're here, and the world still has things in it that need doing, and they are the people around to do them. That's the show. That's all of it, in the end. A world in ruins, gradually covered in something new. Two friends with a sword and the ability to stretch, going to find whatever comes next. The snail waves. You can wave back. If you're still awake, if the world is still quiet around you and you've made it all the way here, I hope this was the right company for whatever hour this is. The theories and the Easter eggs and the hidden details are just the surface of why this show matters. What's underneath them is something harder to put into words, something about paying attention, about what you find when you slow down and actually look at the world you're inhabiting. Drop a comment wherever you are in the world right now. Tell me your time zone, your city, whatever you're comfortable sharing. There is something genuinely meaningful about knowing that someone in Tokyo or Nairobi or Portland or somewhere I've never been is watching this with the lights off, and that the land of Ooh is keeping all of us company across completely different nights. If you haven't yet, a subscription means this kind of content keeps being possible. It's a small thing that makes a real difference. Sleep well.